Hello, I'm Lisa, and I specialize in working with clients that have narcissistic personality disorder, also known as NPD. Welcome back to another episode of my series, Discovering NPD. In this episode, I will be sharing with you about the interpersonal problems faced by people diagnosed with this complex and controversial disorder. But first, a quick recap of this disorder. The DSM-5 states that NPD is characterized by a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy of behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and in a variety of contexts. What lies at the roots of these interpersonal problems? Current literature has traced it back to the discrepancy between their implicit and explicit self-esteem. Research has shown that people with NPD have high implicit self-esteem but relatively lower explicit self-esteem. That is, they innately have a positively skewed self-worth like the general population, but they may consciously evaluate themselves as comparatively low in self-worth. The greater this discrepancy, the greater the symptom severity. People with NPD acknowledge to view themselves more positively than others do, and to combat this, they attribute this to the failure of others to perceive the full magnitude of their likability, intelligence, and attractiveness. This discrepancy between their self-perceptions and meta-perceptions results in them exhibiting self-enhancing behavior to seek the recognition they believe they deserve. For example, people with NPD may like to brag and derogate others who provide negative feedback. They may also believe that others are too dim or jealous to recognize their brilliance. This follows the self-verification theory, which argues that people feel discomfort when they realize that others do not see themselves in the same manner as to how they see themselves, causing them to try and persuade others to follow their own perspective. To maintain their overly positive self-views, people with NPD perceive their own traits as being desirable and associated with respect or status, even though they might not be socially desirable. Reportedly, some people with NPD may want to become more narcissistic due to the personal gains and success it brings, which is consistent with the theory that narcissists would rather be admired than socially liked. When criticized, they perceive their self-esteem as being critically threatened and experience unwarranted humiliation. The underlying feeling of vulnerability, negative anticipation of losing control, and fear of failing to live up to expectations, hopes, and aspirations evokes critical, defensive reactions. This potentially results in a self-enhanced victimization scenario, which exemplifies the complex interaction between actual competence, self-enhancement, and fragility. This defensive act, when threatened, is one of the factors underlying the interpersonal difficulties experienced by clients with NPD and the people around them. These difficulties manifest in both intimate and professional settings. There are two main issues that might exist in intimate relationships with people with NPD. First is the imbalance of power in relationships. The manipulative and overly dominant behaviors of those with NPD enable them to get ahead at the expense of others, compromising others' needs. With the power differential in the relationship, they also manipulate to get their way and make their partners feel guilty for turning them down. Furthermore, they often do not appreciate the compromises made by others, considering them as something to be expected from the other party. For example, this is what my client has said before.
I wanted pizza that night, but he wanted Chinese food. I was so confused because why didn't he want the same thing as me? It just doesn't make sense. I can't agree because it does not meet my needs. He should compromise.
However, to others, these behaviors can be stressful and frustrating.
The minute I stood up against him or he felt he was losing control, he would get aggressive and violent.
She would tell me what the reality was, and she justified it so well. I was so convinced in her arguments that I would sort of accept her reality as my own. Sometimes, I even find myself feeling manipulated, as it seems like everything is always my fault. It makes me lose touch of my own self-worth and viewpoints.
My sister is really hard to get along with. She's always losing her temper easily and blaming others for things that are sometimes really unnecessary.
When I first met Xiao Ming, I found him to be a very friendly and attractive person. It was very easy to make conversation with him. But after a while, the fun comes to a screeching halt when you don't give them the adulation they crave. You begin to feel controlled and exhausted by their constant demands.
This quote by Mei Ling highlights a typical pattern in relationships with someone with NPD. While they initially present as charming and attractive, over the long term, people with NPD will be less committed and are incapable of emotional investment. This leads to the second main issue, a lack of emotional connection with others. Partners of people with NPD are expected to meet their endless needs and are dismissed when they don't. Since they always focus on themselves, they are often insensitive and don't strive to connect with others on a deeper level. This is exemplified by the following story from a client.
I saw a Hermes Birkin bag that I was so in love with, so I told my hubs that I wanted that for my birthday. But he said that he couldn't afford it because it's more than 100k. I was so mad because that bag is the only one I want. If he really loved me, he would find a way to get it for me.
Such behavior often leaves their loved ones feeling inconsequential and unappreciated.
When interacting with them, it is always about themselves and not about connecting with others. They always expect constant praise and acknowledgement from others. It gets quite frustrating as it becomes almost impossible to communicate with them.
She's very egotistical, and conversations are usually dominated by her. Like how she always talks about her achievements and day without bothering about what others have to share. It's just so hard to communicate with her.
Overall, these two problems could cause further implications, such as psychological distress to your close ones. Significant others often feel drained and tense by having to constantly compromise their own needs and fulfill unreasonable expectations. By getting used to living with emotional abandonment, they might begin to doubt themselves and lose their confidence and self-worth. In addition, if people with NPD experience ego threats or rejections due to lack of emotional connection, they could go into a state of narcissistic rage, a state of self-righteous anger that is often explosive and will cause them to view others as subhuman. The person will often forget that others have ever been good or kind to them, or that others even have a right to exist. In extreme cases, people with NPD may become so controlling that once their partner refuses to comply with unreasonable requests, they may resort to violence. Parents with NPD will also face difficulty modeling stable relationships, with research establishing correlations between parental personality disorders and negative consequences like poor parental communication with the child. In professional settings, NPD clients can be ineffective in collaborating with others. Though often found in supervisory positions, leaders of NPD exhibit selfish and exploitative leadership styles as their grandiosity results in devaluation of fellow peers and disregard for corporate rules. They are frequently insensitive to others and are dismissive of tasks they consider beneath them. These are some things I recall my clients have said before doing therapy.
I am a totally professional sales consultant. If more of my dull-witted clients could understand my value, I would sell beyond quota. My plans are to educate my clients just a little more about making better use of my professional sales skills. I know they like me personally.
In fact, one of my clients even mentioned this about their previous therapist.
The therapist, if she could even be considered one, refused to understand my point of view and could not give me any advice on how to make my partner understand where I am coming from. Not only that, but she even hinted that I was the one to be blamed here. The heck?
On the other hand, this is what their colleagues have shared.
They'll do anything to be the one in charge and are happy to charm the higher ups to get what they want. And it actually sort of works sometimes.
Also, my fellow colleagues have shared with me some of their difficulties in working with them.
Therapy was largely ineffective, mostly because he didn't think that he needed it. And I can feel quite helpless and belittled sometimes. However, I feel that it is slightly easier to get through to him if I focus on his view of the situations and during periods of time where he has higher motivation.
These differences between self-perceptions and other perceptions of them results in further problems. Work relationships with people with NPD can cause stress and conflicts, often resulting in a hostile working environment and possibly a reduction in work productivity. People with NPD have a higher tendency to challenge and provoke the therapist, and this unnecessarily elicits negative responses. Overall, knowledge on these interpersonal problems faced and differences in perspectives between the person with NPD and those around them should be taken into consideration when interacting and working with NPD clients, so as to effectively execute appropriate interventions. We've examined the various interpersonal problems faced and caused by people with NPD, and it seems that people around them are feeling more distressed than they are. This brings us to an unresolved question in the literature. Do individuals with NPD actually experience psychological distress or substantial impairment? Some literature shows that the strength of association between NPD and psychological distress is actually small. In fact, a larger association was found between NPD and suffering to others. Should people with NPD actually be diagnosed clinically? This requires us to examine the bigger picture of what actually is the definition of mental illness. While we are familiar with a prominent few, distress, disability, dysfunction, and violation of social norms, each of these characteristics encompasses a certain degree of ambiguity in them. For example, social norms are constantly changing with time and within cultures, with NPD being one of the 10 personality disorders included in the DSM-5, even though the client themselves may not experience significant distress sometimes. This highlights that there is really no standard formula to follow to diagnose a mental illness. It is thus important for therapists to be proficient and careful in analyzing each case to determine whether there is a need for treatment. Well, this brings us to the end of today's episode. If you want to see more of these videos, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe. Thank you, and see you next time.